Good day to us in the year from the creation of the world 6748 Batu came to Kyiv with a heavy force with many of his forces and surrounded the city and besieged the city with a Tatar force. This is how the story about the defense of Kyiv begins in the Batu Chronicle. I'd rather read about it in Old Russian. It's much more interesting for Kyiv to settle in many ways at the site of Bate. A few pillars of Tatar power, and there was hail to you holding greatness and be bad. And at the city and grazing its nets about a few, and heaven to hear from the voice of creaking. Not I his carts are many rhubarb, and I command his fornication, and name from the voice of 100 cloth his Old Russian language. How is it wait for the time potat tasha in advance pedag filthy Polossian shelves, it's melodic. It's necessary to feel it. Speech is much more interesting in the original than in the heaps of translation into modern language. Such a picture is so vivid and imaginative. Only trouble is that considered long almost an eyewitness account of the defense of Kyiv in the Batu page the annals, as shown by modern research source. Academician to pound it the man who survived under any regime in Ukraine, which served the communists who invented the 1500th anniversary of Kyiv on the empty space. In short, very loyal man. He's still historian. He sometimes wakes up like a pro and makes real work, so here it is long spent. The source analysis of the Batu Chronicle, and proved that she all composed to pluck from different sources, primarily from ancient sources, such as describing the defense of Jerusalem from the Romans, in Josephus and in general. This compilation is a compilation for which there is no real history, is a literary novel written long after the events, and how I speak he started for a long time after it. Such is the modern internet language, but shorter, saying all this nonsense. And one of the major pillars on which kept historical science describing the heroic defense of Kyiv was just embossed academician of the Ukrainian Republic under your feet. You are a historian. And now the defense of Kyiv too. Describe, even if history output Dimitra and his captivity and pardon Batu is only transcriptions of the history of Josephus, which was defended by the fortress of Masada, in my account of the defense in general. And that becomes what's the difference in total some fortress on defended. In that ancient people were captured and pardoned here, well as here is how then to live. Then refer to the events and deeds of long ago, the past only. One way through the circumstances of the case as a criminologist on the fragments of evidence, in footprints at the crime scene and confusing witnesses, restores the real picture accidents. And so much real that's the same forensic. Likewise, having you, and with more or less fury that erupts, it's continued endlessly the whole of the 13th century. It will go even after the Dish and Kipchak Polossian steppe will be fully captured by the Mongols. Will come under the Mongol. Here's a interesting us history. And here during the Western Mongol campaign, if the campaign in northeastern Russia, everyday battle is killed 4 months after returning from the Vladimir and Ryazan by the Mongols. 3 years was doing something in the Polossian the steppes in the autumn of 1240. Army Batu made farther to the west, targeting Kyiv, Gallic and further Poland, Hungary, Germany, Moravia. Others strow what happened in the past 3 years. Unfortunately, humans, as people died and did not leave the chronicles, do not tales, folk tales, or epics. Same gloss Bulgarians were more fortunate because in the Tatar national epic Yedigay is scenes and lines clearly extracted from an earlier Bulgar tales. Still, mounds were direct the ancestors of the Kazan Tatars and Cumans of the band. And the people disappeared, they fully became part of other peoples, marked the beginning of other nations, but they crumbled apart from them. There was no tales, is not a rabbit, not even the grave. They have little to say to the period of the struggle of the Kipchaks from the Mongolian invasion. Although something still can, archaeologists have studied Polossian burial for a long time in more amazing facts 1220s in dusty Kipchak Polossian stone images, which was mound celebrate the place of burial of a noble Kipchak soldiers. They start hiding inside the mounds of them put out. Kipchak sky aristocracy feared for their ancestors, who had gone all blue and not afraid that the Mongols will find break these graves destroying her. They destroyed the organizational structure of the people and ordinary nomads were entered the new something still can archaeologists have studied Polossian burial for a long time in more amazing facts, 1220s in dusty Kipchak Polossian stone images, which was mound celebrate the place of burial of a noble Kipchak soldiers. They start hiding inside the mounds of them put out. Kipchak sky aristocracy feared for their ancestors, who had gone all blue, and not afraid that the Mongols will find break these graves destroying her. They destroyed the organizational structure of the people, and ordinary nomads were entered the Mamluk Kipchak army. But I will tell you about its fate and how the great Kipchak-Mongol War of the 13th century ended, when we talk about the Battle of Angelit and the Great Hulagu campaign in the Middle East. This topic deserves a separate conversation. Meanwhile, we are on the borders of Russia, on the borders of Kyiv and Rus, on the borders of southwestern Russia, where there is the only large city in Eastern Europe, Kyiv, which in its heyday numbered from 50 to 60,000 inhabitants, and was for some the center of all Russia and the centers of trade between the Varangians and northern Europe and, accordingly, on the one hand, and Byzantium on the other. But now the great road from the Varangians to the Greeks has faded. Kiev has also faded, and you have plundered a lot. There was a struggle for it, and he is no longer the center of power, experiencing a clear decline, and now the Mongols are coming at him. The entire Mongol army will fall on Kiev, but before that happens, there is a contradiction in the Mongol camp caused by a lack of loot and lack of clear prospects for obtaining it, because in the eyes of the Mongols, who all came one way or another through the Chinese War. Observe Bogota participated as a commander when storming the Bes-Andon and Batu so well. It's wrong to stick Conshuman battle in the Arbat on duty. He was interning at that time with Subadai Bogoturu. They saw these Chinese cities behind her with them 50,000 in. Kiev was a miserable county town. And looking at it, the Mongols understood that they would not find the kind of loot here that they were used to taking in Central Asia, China, and other countries. And quarrels broke out between them. And they led to a completely ugly scene at a feast. After returning from a trip to northeastern Russia, when Batu took the floor to raise the first cup for common sense to act as the eldest in this campaign, and formally he had the right to do so. He was the commander-in-chief of the Psycho-Unger leg south, and the storms did not allow him to do this. An ugly scene took place that Batu himself described in a letter to Gu Yong Harwell, because he hurried to immediately inform the children of the great year. Then he wrote 3 were preparing to give a speech and took over common. Bol made first to speak was the most senior in this meeting, is the one who is the leader of the campaign to formally join the bat, and was thus the leader of the foot south. Saw this as more nor less than the claim to leadership expected in the struggle for power. After the imminent death of his painful and drunk father from the guides, I decided to stop Beatty. Written guides and a letter which describes the scandal thus force the eternal sky and grandeur sovereigns and uncles. We destroyed the city, make it and subordinate your power 11 countries and peoples, and then complains that at the feast when he as it became the first race, scratching at him angry storms with this. Why Storm put it this way: how dare to drink the cup before anyone Batu hands, which climbs to be we ought to Turity Hill, to stamp down the feet of those bearded women, who climb to be Isu's south. He was seconded to let us chambers of wood for the breasts of these women armed with bows, asked them the son of Olga mystery at Argos. He kept saying, come on. We have the right to their wooden tails, "What about us?" wrote the Bat. "We have to bring all sorts of arguments about the case among strangers and hostile peoples." But the way it went irreconcilably, and Batu complained. Kagan Guk apparently very quickly learned about the contents of the letter of Batu Khan to his father and wanting to take effect. He left the army front, ran in Mongolia for a few months, hopped to Karakorum, delivery killed. But he already received a letter. Batu was furious. He refused to listen to his son and kept him in the waiting room for several weeks, not allowing him to justify himself. When he finally allowed his very demoted exes to plead with his beloved wife, Turkino, Mother Guyuk, but perhaps being on fun, he attacked his son with a torrent of accusations, saying that you did not get a goat's hoof, how dare you violate Genghis Khan's yasa, and speak out against your commander-in-chief. He refused to listen to Guyuk's justification, and sent him back to Batu's court as commander-in-chief because, according to Mongolian and, say, Chinese military traditions, the commander-in-chief has more power in a campaign than the emperor, and the same was prescribed by the law of Genghis Khan. Therefore Uyukaburi and Orguz were handed over to the court and executioner, but by the time they were brought to Batu, Batu had already cooled down, and he realized that it made no sense to quarrel with the great Kagan. So he pretended to be satisfied with the punishment that was inflicted on him. My son Glitch was a benefit, and sent him back to fight in the North Caucasus. An event occurred here that is not clear at all what is connected with and where it is localized, but it left a mark in all Eastern sources. This is the storming of the city. BBC or My Kitty, or Met from and or in general. There are a dozen spelling variants of this name. The scripture is different, but the bottom line is that there was a long siege that lasted for more than a month, accompanied by heavy losses on the part of the Mongol troops. And after this very town of Mikis was taken, it was ordered to count the number of dead garages by severed ears, and brought Minga Khan, who commanded the operation, to capture Mikosi, 270,000 severed ears. But this is a clear exaggeration nevertheless, that the castle of Is.M. Birizin believed that this is Moscow because Rashid al-Din's text talks about taking this macro. So it's like that one about him. Stormed 8 is much more normal time for such a storm, but it is also, of course, as most things in the history of science, more or less likely yoga using. However, I usually try to repeat or to explain the most modern scientific looks. So here today, so heroic activities of the defense of Kyiv. QESTIONED. The duration of the defense of Kyiv? Question probably right. Was the Eastern chroniclers who reported that in the capital of South Russia, Sex, after 8 days of resistance abandoned by their friends, and defeat of Kyiv by the Mongols, who had previously been commonplace in the literature, is also now put under great doubt. It draws on the words of Plano Carpini, who said that Kyiv was 200 yards after Batu pogrom, but Plano Carpini, who traveled to the south of Russia a few years after the fall of Kyiv, he was the storyteller of the Polovtsian, all destroyed, reporting that during the trip across the steppe he didn't see, in addition to numerous bones of the Cumans scattered like on the cart. Only the bones are not typed, if all, even the floor cut in. Obviously not all killed, and Grain he had reason to exaggerate the extent of the Mongol massacre in his reports to the Roman Pope, at least to encourage into action. After all, the Catholic Church sought to conquer Orthodox Russia and, if possible, and be baptized in the Catholic faith themselves. Mongols. It turns out that the message of Plano Carpini has now been refuted by archaeological research, and how the author mentions many years of excavations in Kyiv and archaeological research. Kyiv and Mongolian tear it up Ken after Batu riots. All the archaeological structure of Kyiv remained the same, and the ensemble architectural Kyiv remained intact with the exception of the tithe church, and continued to delight travelers until the 17th century, when it was mostly destroyed during the flood and the great wars of Bohdan Khmelnytsky with the Poles, and the Russian Polish War. These are the cakes. Here you get it. Even for me it was unexpected. I still looking for the pupil became the Soviet school, where the destruction of Kyiv was a proven fact because there is a lot of archaeological evidence of the fact. That's all these archaeological evidence they themselves require. Very careful analysts, such as Volodymyr Volinsky taken by the Mongols Varia raid. Batu left us with her skull pierced with nails, and such same skull was found in Yaroslavl. You burying yourself. I told you page 1 where the bones with traces the violent death of so on, and on this basis the Mongols accuses the terrible atrocities that Yaroslavl in Volodymyr Volinsky. And for a long time I could not explain this cheat because of Khwarezmsha Muhammad Muslims. The Christian knights. The Russian was not involved in the 13th century. The menace of society of their victims they killed very much willing, but just the first Khan, who introduced torture in Mongolia and began to torture the victim in the execution of their, was a glitch. But during the Western campaign, he was just a prince, but maybe it distinguished auxiliary troops which can court with a can. Unknown. But it was a lot easier. Is the Middle Ages hammering nails in the skull of the dead was common in Rus' way of dealing with vampires. Here in Transylvania to the ghouls stood up. He hammered a stake and the silver bullet for him. Piss and Russia in the skull hammered nails, all here and Mongolian no, but I wonder more and more if the movement in southern Russia, the Mongols, met fierce resistance, not only Russian princes, who fled before them, one and all, leaving their people how much black hoods, other black hats, or translated into their native language Karakolpak. Yes, let the Karakolpaks, who are direct relatives, Krokpaks, living in the Karakolpak autonomous region of Uzbekistan, once existed on the shore of the Aral Sea. Russians were defeated by the Japanese. The name was thrown back to the Russian borders in the 11th century. They became federates of the Kievan princes, were not settled in Paris, and designated a fortified Russian face here. A fortified line. A serif line that fenced off the Kiev Principality from the Great Steppe and lived here in a compact mass, served the Kievan princes and were their chosen army. And these are the troops of the direct analogue of the future, the Cossacks of the Moscow state. Were met most fiercely by the Mongol invasion. The Mongols had to storm almost every fortress here, and there were many of them. Here is a description of the capture of one of these fortresses of the border Rik sheep settlement. According to archaeological data, there were so fierce battles that they even got into Chinese sources. In the biography of Tsubodoi Bogota, and describes in detail how he took historians believe that the city of the fox is torture, and the thugs of these very black caps and them formed them from Russians from Kipchaks. There is also an auxiliary cause for further march back. According to archaeologists, all this has been excavated. Archaeologists have excavated fortresses taken by the Mongols by storm. Of course, the picture is heavy where I have it here. Where did I put it all? And here it is, and he's still there. And where did I put it all? The pages from my unwritten book that was lost.